Many years ago, it was discovered that uranium miners have an extremely high rate of lung cancer. After numerous scientific studies, experts finally were able to explain it. Uranium miners have 3 times the normal rate of lung cancer because they breathe a radioactive gas underground, a gas that comes from the rocks they mine. It's called radon. It's an invisible, odorless, tasteless gas caused by the gradual breaking down of uranium. However, a few years ago, Canadian health authorities found this gas not only in uranium mines, but in ordinary homes. It came from surrounding soil that had a tiny amount of uranium in it. The authorities were so surprised and concerned that they launched a cross-country survey of 14,000 homes. That survey revealed that some houses in Canada have levels of radon gas higher than the maximum limit for a uranium mine. The survey also revealed surprisingly high levels of radon in homes on the prairies. It all started here in the uranium mining town of Elliott Lake in northern Ontario. It may seem like a quiet, peaceful place now, but in 1976, this town was in an uproar. High levels of radioactive radon gas had been discovered in the basements of some houses in Elliott Lake, and the federal government took immediate action. Homes throughout the city were tested for the presence of radon by government inspectors.
Plug it in, and what we're going to do is take a radon gas check. What we do is we run the machine for 5 minutes, and if there's any radon particles in the air, it'll suck them into the filter.
At a large public meeting in the town, federal officials admitted there were many unanswered questions about radon.
Radon gas is a nefarious gas to try and deal with, and we don't know how it works in great detail.
It will be the first complete...
The news reports at the time captured the urgency of the situation.
People here expect the results to be as disturbing as they are overdue.
And when they arrived, the results were disturbing. The tests revealed that about 16% of the homes surveyed were above the so-called action level. That's the level of radon gas at which the government would pay for remedial work to get the level down. They had to do that in 200 of the 2,000 homes they surveyed. And altogether, the program cost $4 million over 4 years. The man in charge of the program was a scientific consultant named Art Scott.
We were hired to remove contaminated radioactive material from around houses in town. The general impression was this was going to be a big pick and shovel job. Now, this house, we spent about $3,000 in remedial work, but it wasn't spent in digging out contaminated material. We looked for contaminated material around town. We couldn't find it. This was a real surprise because it was taken for granted. You could not have high radon levels in houses without the presence of contaminated material. The problem here was just the natural soil, which is really very similar to the soil in many other parts of Canada.
After what they learned at Elliott Lake, the federal government undertook a cross-country survey of radon levels in Canada. They studied 14,000 homes, selected at random in 19 different cities. And for the most part, there wasn't much of a problem. But when they got to the prairies, they found something they hadn't expected. Here in Winnipeg, they were amazed to find that things were just as bad as in Elliott Lake. In 16% of the houses they surveyed here, exactly the same percentage as in Elliott Lake, the federal government discovered radon above the action level they'd been using in the uranium mining town.
I was certainly surprised by the Winnipeg findings, and so were a number of other scientists in the community. The conditions in Winnipeg are so different from those in Elliott Lake. The soil differs, the geological history is different. There seemed to be no good reason why the readings in Winnipeg should be comparable to those in Elliott Lake, and yet they are.
The city of Regina had the second highest radon levels in the Cross Canada survey, with about 10% of its homes above the Elliott Lake action level. A radon expert at the University of Regina, Professor Bev Robertson, was also taken aback by the survey's findings.
It was quite a surprise because the kind of information I had available to me at least, and other people, was that it was fairly low here. But we shouldn't have been surprised because, of course, right north of here are the world's richest uranium deposits. And this soil we're sitting on here was once the soil on top of that, and it's been washed off by glaciers and ground off, I should say, and has accumulated here. So it's not surprising that it has a pretty high uranium level and therefore a high radon content.
The man in charge of the cross-country survey for radon levels was Dr. Ernest Letourneau, head of radiation protection for the Federal Health Department in Ottawa.
The #1 community in terms of radon levels was Winnipeg, in a city, a province which have no known connection to uranium mining.
Oh, this was a real surprise. We didn't expect that the prairie cities would be that high. And it turns out that one of the factors which influence the amount of radon that enters a home is a type of soil, the dryness of the soil, how finely divided it is. And Winnipeg is built on largely clay soils, which apparently emanate radon at a very high rate.
But though the study found 4 years ago that homes in Winnipeg and Regina were unexpectedly high, the results were published only in an obscure scientific journal, and there still has been no effort to inform the general public in those cities.
When the federal government conducted its survey of radon levels across Canada, it took what are known as grab samples. That is, it tested those houses for radon over a period of several minutes, although the government scientists themselves would admit that those levels could vary significantly from hour to hour or from day to day. There is, however, a new way to detect radon. It involves small sensors like this one, which measure radon levels not for a period of minutes, but for a number of weeks. We put these sensors in 50 basements throughout Winnipeg. We left them there for a month, and then we collected them, and we sent them to a laboratory in San Francisco to get the results.
The new radon monitors were invented by this scientist, whose laboratory is just across the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco. Ward Alter has formed a company called Teradex, which has taken hundreds of thousands of radiation measurements all over the world. From our Winnipeg survey, we got back 47 of the 50 monitors we'd installed. And when they arrived at the lab, each one of them was opened, and a small plastic chip was taken out. After that, all 47 of the chips were placed in a tray, and the tray was soaked in a chemical solution. The chemical etches out spots that have been damaged by radiation particles from radon gas. The chips were then placed under a microscope that was connected to a video camera. By looking at a television monitor, and by counting the number of damage points on each chip caused by radiation, Ward Alter can calculate the average radon level in each of the Winnipeg basements where we placed one of his monitors.
This, as a matter of fact, is one of the highest houses from your Winnipeg survey. And I believe it's at a level of about 2 or 3 times above the action level in Elliott Lake.
So, at half this level, the federal government stepped in Elliott Lake.
Exactly, and yet this is an ordinary house in Winnipeg.
Dick Oswald is the health physicist at the Teradex lab. He analyzed the results of our Winnipeg survey.
Well, in that survey of about 47 houses, the findings were that about 30% of those houses actually exceeded the action level that's used in Elliott Lake.
What do we know about the link between risk to health and the presence of radon?
The risk is well known because of all of the miners in uranium mines over the last 50 years or more, many of whom have died of lung cancer, and now those lung cancer deaths are directly relatable to the radon exposures they got, admittedly very high radon exposures, in the mines. The problem that we're seeing now is that many homes, just ordinary normal homes, have radon levels which are almost as high as a uranium mine.
There's a very good analogy that one can make between radon levels and cigarette smoking. The kinds of levels that you observe, for example, in Winnipeg, that are 2 or 3 times the action level in Elliott Lake, those levels would correspond to smoking something like 8 to 10 cigarettes per day for every man, woman, and child that lives under those circumstances.
So if you've got a 5-year-old child living in one of those houses,
it's equivalent to them smoking 8 to 10 cigarettes.
That's right. In your highest house, for example, it would be in that 8 to 10 cigarettes per day range.
We went back to Winnipeg to visit some of the houses which had the highest radon readings in our survey. Reg Royko is an insurance man who bought his house in 1971. We told him that we had found about twice the level of radon in his home as the allowable limit for houses in Elliott Lake.
Well, my initial reaction is that it kind of concerns me because I've been following the urea formaldehyde controversy, and I'm beginning to wonder if we've got another controversy on our hands.
Knowing now that John Crozier is a retired telephone company lineman. He's lived in this house for 28 years, and his home also showed roughly twice the Elliott Lake action level for radon. How do you feel about that?
Well, you got me wondering now, you know, like, what do I do? You know, what is the, I don't know. Do I insulate? Do I seal it? Or what do I do now? I don't know.
Ken and Nancy White bought their house 2 years ago, and they're concerned about the possible impact of radon on their health.
The radon, you're saying, is directly linked with lung cancer. Neither of us smoke, okay? And we choose not to do that for a variety of reasons, but one of them is certainly because of a risk of cancer.
And we're told
yes.
by the people who, in fact, analyze the results of your house, that a level roughly equivalent to the one in your house is like smoking 8 to 10 cigarettes a day for each of you.
Yeah, I'm not too happy about that.
Yeah, that doesn't thrill me.
We also visited Regina, where the Colson family has a farm on the outskirts of town. Professor Bev Robertson had taken a radon reading 3 months before this in the basement bedroom of the Colsons' teenage son. He'd previously found 3 times the Elliott Lake action level, and we asked him to do another test, this time with the grab sampling technique used by the federal government. In this system, air is drawn through a filter for 20 minutes by a small air pump. The filter is then tested for radiation.
It's a little less than...
As Robertson told Ernie and Gail Colson, this test revealed a just slightly lower level of radon gas.
But it's still almost twice the value that is considered in Elliott Lake, a level at which one should do something about it.
Now, what would you suggest we do?
Well, if you'd like to do something about it, I think the most straightforward thing to do would be to check for cracks in the basement, particularly since your basement is partly finished. You can still do that. And also, you can put some covers over the drains so that the radon gas that's coming in doesn't get up into the basement, and then it's distributed presumably by the furnace through the rest of the house, particularly in winter.
It's really not that expensive for us to do
that sort of thing. I don't think it would be very expensive at all. No, I think it would be a pretty good investment and an easy thing to do.
Radon gas can enter a house through gaps between the basement floor and the walls, and also through basement drains or sumps. A hot air furnace can distribute the radioactive gas upstairs. Some experts say insulating and weather stripping a house can increase the radon buildup. Yet despite all that is known about radon, and though there's a law to protect people in uranium mining and processing towns, Canada's chief radiation official, Ernest Letourneau, acknowledges there is nothing to protect the general public from radon in the soil.
There have never been any laws for naturally occurring radiation. It's something that's found all through nature, and so far no one has, in any country as far as I know, has sat down and said, we're going to put a limit on what is acceptable from naturally occurring radiation. I think that most countries are waiting to determine what the level of risk is for the whole population. Eventually, what will come out of all this study throughout the world is some kind of guideline for the homeowner as to what is an acceptable or a low-risk level of radon in the homes.
What about the guy in Winnipeg who says, we've got a guideline. In Elliott Lake, at a certain level, the government has come in and renovated houses. I'm sitting here in Winnipeg with twice that or 3 times that amount of radon in my home, and nobody's doing anything for me, including informing me about it.
Well, the radon in houses is a provincial jurisdiction.
So we went to a provincial spokesman. The Saskatchewan government official in charge of radon monitoring is Randy Sentis of the Environment Ministry. He admits that normally standards protecting the public from any given pollutant are about 10 times as strict as standards protecting workers in an industry.
But again, that concept is applied to an emission from an industry where the workers are being exposed to that pollutant in the industry, and you come up with a number that is acceptable for the public outside of the industry. I don't know that it's really a comparable situation where you deal with a pollutant in a workplace compared to the same pollutant not caused by the industry.
If there is a link between radon and cancer, should there not be some sort of standard?
Well, you only create a standard where it's needed. I mean, you don't create a standard to deal with a problem when your work indicates the problem doesn't exist in the first place.
But the work Sentis' own department has done indicates that there is a problem. They prepared this map identifying radon problem areas in northern Saskatchewan, and they later found even higher levels in the south. The National Council on Radiation Protection, the most respected body of radiation scientists in North America, has also written a report on radon. The council says that 9,000 people in the United States are dying every year from radon exposure. Dr. Letourneau is one of the 5 experts on the council's radon committee.
The risk is one that has not really been determined in reality. The risk, the calculated risk...
We're told that 9,000 people in the U.S., and I suppose if you statistically extrapolate, 900 in Canada, die every year from lung cancer because of radon.
This is a statistical risk. It's a calculated risk. We have to be able to show that there is a real risk to the people who live in these houses.
Why do we have no guideline in Canada and nothing with a legislative backing if your study was done almost 5 years ago now, and if you did find levels of radon, under whatever circumstances, that are higher than those at which concern is raised in Elliott Lake?
Well, this is a question that's being studied at the present time.
But you've been studying it for 5 years.
Yes. The risk or the danger to public health, taking all the other risks and dangers put together, is not one of which requires immediate, precipitate, drastic action.
But Ward Alter at the Teradex lab in San Francisco says the problem of natural radon should receive the same urgent action given to other public health risks that are also natural.
Polio, for example, has been eradicated from the population by certain actions in terms of immunization. Smallpox is virtually gone. That's a public health issue, perfectly natural viruses, which have been reduced by public health action. Here we have a perfectly natural cause of death and lung cancer, which also can be eliminated.
Or at least controlled within your house.
Controlled within your house. And nothing is being done.
Back in 1979, Canada's Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation commissioned a report on how homeowners and home builders could keep radon out. The report, which included several diagrams, was supposed to be published as a brochure. But now, almost 6 years later, the brochure still has not been released. CMHC told us it's because there's been no agreement on what constitutes a dangerous level of radon. So what can you do to keep radon out of a house? In Elliott Lake, we looked at the steps the government took there. The man who supervised the renovations was Art Scott.
Well, this is what we did in a number of houses. Here we have a fan. It's connected to a pipe that goes down underneath the house. It draws radon out of the soil beneath the house. It blows it out here. It can't go into the house. We put this in a number of houses, and it brought the levels down from high to acceptable. The cost was about $500. The other main thing we did in these houses was to seal the basements to keep radon out. There is a gap between the wall and the floor in most houses. We enlarged that and poured in this flexible rubber material, which both fills the gap and can also be used to fill around any water pipes and so on. The cost of this can be up to $2,000. This is very effective in keeping radon out.
But in Winnipeg, there is no government renovation program for the people who have high levels of radon gas in their homes.
Is it a matter of holding the federal government responsible, saying, look, they paid for renovations in Elliott Lake, they should pay for renovations here, or is it simply a matter of wanting to be told what's going on?
wanting to be told, and I think the average person could look out for himself. He could take steps to correct it, maybe. If people are told now, you know, more so than if they're held in the dark.
We would like to know what to do. We'll take the expense and do it. Now, if the government wants to reimburse us for it, fine. But I think what we're mostly concerned about now is what do we do?
Would the fact that the federal government has a policy of renovating homes in community
expect the same type of policy to be followed, yes.
In Sweden, testing throughout the country revealed one of the most extensive indoor radon problems in the world. And the government responded by setting up a radon loans program, providing up to $2,700 to homeowners with extremely high levels who want to renovate. A maximum radon limit for new houses has also been put in the building code in Sweden, and it's the same level as the action level that was used in Elliott Lake. Consultant Art Scott says that aside from legislation, there are several things that could be done here.
First, Canada is a big place, and although we've had a number of surveys already, there are still a number of places where we have no idea of what the average radon level is. Secondly, we could certainly encourage the development of houses that have basements that resist the entry of soil gas and radon. And the third thing is we could develop methods to indicate where there might be problems before the houses were built.
Well, when you're dealing with any risk which comes from nature, it's really not a black and white issue, and particularly it's not a yes-no issue. You can't say, yes, this person is subjected to the risk and this person isn't.
Radon scientist Bev Robertson in Regina is also a statistics expert, and he's analyzed the economics of preventing what might be as many as 900 deaths a year from radon in Canada. Is it possible to put a specific cost on saving the lives that will be claimed by radon gas and lung cancer?
Well, that's a very good way of doing it. You can actually easily calculate how much money would be spent in saving a life by taking the action that one would have to take to minimize that risk. I have done some rough calculations, and I'd say that if we were to put into place a program to do that, it would cost about $25,000 for every life we save. And of course, that's a pretty inexpensive way to save a life.
If you know that certain simple things can be done, is there not some way you can put all of that into a program of action so people don't have to be exposed to the risk, whatever it is?
It may well be that eventually the various levels of government will put this into effect if the risk is shown to be sufficiently large and if the costs are warranted.
Action levels are a political decision. They have to take into account not just health, they have to take into account economics, they have to take into account social effects. It's very difficult to do this. And as Einstein said, politics is much more difficult than science.
That kind of story frightens a lot of people. What can they do if they, how do they even know whether they've got the problem?
Frankly, Eric, the individual is going to have a hard time to find out if they've got radon in their basement and to do anything about it, even if they could find out. They could contact the provincial health authorities in Manitoba, for example, but they frankly have told us they don't know a great deal about the subject. The federal government has done the only real study in Canada. They tell us what they really need now is a 5-year study and $1 million to do it, and they quite honestly don't know if they've got the money.
We look for